Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and today I want to try something new, which is objectively comparing two factions. This is almost impossible, as different factions do different things, which makes them difficult to compare without having anything in common. Is adding power better than playing extra cards? It's really tough to say, and highly situational. With playtesting, you typically look into game logs and points scored, but this needs to account for player skill, the presence of the partner faction, and any number of other factors. I want to try something more objective, which is a side-by-side card comparison. I've always felt that vampires were just weak because their cards just seemed weaker. But comparing cards is difficult in isolation because it misses the greater context of the faction. Also, the game evolves over time, so what may have been strong or weak during one period will change over time. The vampires are often compared to sharks because the sharks took what the vampires did and swam with it, but I think there's a better comparable: mad scientists. Not only did these two factions come out at the same time, which really helps with historical context, but their cards also line up very well individually. Both factions place a lot of power counters and have bits of destruction and self-destruction. This won't be a perfect match, but there are a lot of direct comparables, and by ranking cards individually, we can create a score for the two factions. I'll do my best to consider only the individual factions in a vacuum, as it's the best way to see the strength of the cards. This means not factoring in the Titan, because if the vampires prove to be weak, it becomes the reason why they got a Titan. So let's see how they compare. Starting with the power 2s, both of these minions have the potential to create a single power counter. Fledging Vampire gives it to herself, while Igor gives it to someone else. I have to admit, this is a bit of a toss-up. Fledging Vampire often fails to generate a counter and is a bad first-turn minion, but Igor can also fail to generate a counter if you have no other minions in play when the base scores or when it's destroyed. I have to give the point to Igor though because of Heavy Drinker, who wants to destroy a different minion. Therefore, Fledging Vampire for her faction would waste the counter, while in the same situation, Igor would buff up the destroying minion. It's close, but I think Igor is just more consistent. The Heavy Drinker and Lab Assistant also generate one power counter, and both require the presence of another minion to facilitate that counter. Heavy Drinker requires you to destroy that minion, which sometimes has value, but not for vampires, and will more often than not result in the net loss of global power. The Lab Assistant is frustrating as a first turn play because it must be given to a different minion, but the Heavy Drinker has the same problem, and keeping the minion will be more valuable way more often than destroying your own minion, so this is an easy win for Lab Assistant. Night Stalker and the Monster have nothing to do with each other unfortunately, but both are power 4. Night Stalker is a strictly better laser tops who can destroy a minion of power 2 and achieve 5 power. The Monster reduces power to play an extra minion. So what's better, destroying a minion of power 2 or playing an extra minion? This is tough to compare, but I have to think that playing an extra minion is better in general. Destruction is a stall tactic, which doesn't always work. Extra minion plays will result in a net power gain, even though more cards are necessary. Sometimes you want that minion giving power to her base so that you can close it on your turn. Admittedly, this is harder to set up because it requires at least 2 more cards, one to give the counter and another minion to play, but because this is a talent that can be used every turn, Monster has much more upside, so another point for the mad scientists. Also, Swarm factions tend to be among the highest rated factions, so I also would emphasize extra minion play. The Count and Air Doctor both generate power counters. The Count powers himself, and the Doctor powers everyone else. The vampires have very little cards that actually trigger the Count, only 5, and 4 of them involve minions of power 2. Air Doctor can be used indefinitely and is more consistent. There's also value in spreading out the power, as Air Doctor can be used to win any base, whereas the Count wins his base. Both synergize with their 4s, as Night Stalker will also give a counter to the Count, while Air Doctor lets the monster play an extra minion every turn, which is a great engine. So despite the difference in the way the counters are accumulated, Air Doctor is the more consistent, better card that synergizes with his faction better. After looking at only the minions, the Mad Scientists are already up 4-0, and the actions do not do the vampires any favors. The cards that really stood out and gave me the idea for this video are Mad Monster Party and Jolt. Both generate power counters, but Mad Monster Party is clearly worse than Jolt in that it affects less minions. This is another knock against Fledgling Vampire, whose ability is either wasted or redundant with Mad Monster Party. This is clearly a weaker card, and unfortunately, it falls on the vampire side. The other cards that immediately stood out were Cull the Weak and Angry Mob. Cull the Weak discards minions to gain power counters per card discarded. Angry Mob places them on the bottom of the deck and can be any card. There are times when it is advantageous to be in the discard pile, but they are rare. Putting them on the bottom of your deck lets you keep your good cards and just delay using them. But let's say that these were still equal in power. The fact that Angry Mob lets you use any cards, not just minions, is way more flexible than Cull the Weak. In fact, other than Cull the Weak, the vampires lack any good burst card to close a base, which makes your minions even more vital, so why would you discard them? Angry Mob is easily the superior card, and again, the Mad Scientists come out on top. Let's talk about destruction. Big Gulp can destroy a minion of power 4 or less, which is pretty rare. Most destruction is capped at 2 or even 3. Blitzed has the potential to destroy more powerful minions, but at a high cost, too high for me personally. Unless I were desperate, I'd rather use those counters for breaking a base, so Big Gulp is the winner. Hey, vampires are on the board. Crack of Dusk and It's Alive are also comparable, extra minion plays that get a +1 counter. Would you rather play a minion of power 2 or less from your discard pile, or play an extra minion? I think the upside to the extra minion is more useful, as it provides more power for a better big drop. Recycling has its upsides, but looking at the faction cards themselves, I'd rather take the Mad Scientist minions with a counter over Fledgling Vampire. Summon Wolves and Uber Serum are comparable in that they both generate a power counter at the start of your turn and require a minion. Summon Wolves is interesting because it doesn't require the minion right away, and the power isn't really there until you activate it, which is really nice. However, Summon Wolves starts from 0 and also loses all of its equity when the action is destroyed because the counters are fake. Uber Serum not only makes a minion indestructible, which has great value, but if Uber Serum were to be destroyed, you do not lose the counters gained thus far. The counters are on the minion, not the action itself. That alone is enough to make Uber Serum the better card in the general sense, but the indestructible nature really combines well with the Mad Scientist cards, so clearly Uber Serum is the better card. Opportunist and German Engineering repeat the same debate from the respective king minions. Both generate +1 counters based on triggers. Opportunist has the potential to fire more frequently, but that rarely happens. German Engineering is consistent and completely in your control, so I prefer German Engineering for all the same reasons I prefer Air Doctor over the Count. This leaves only 2 sets remaining, and this is where the comparables begin to get weaker. I compare Buffet and Body Shop because they are both the big plays of their respective factions. Buffet is a strange card because it does not work with vampires at all. You have to win a base, rewarding all minions on other bases who did not help you contribute to winning there. Outside of Cull the Weak, this is really hard to do if all your minions are spread out, and if they are spread out, then what minions are you discarding with Cull the Weak? Buffet almost necessitates the presence of a partner swarm faction to be effective, and their big play lacks a big punch. Body Shop, however, can create a massive drop in power and is one of the few ways to effectively double your power on a base. I use this card every game if I can, and it is unquestionably the better big drop. In fact, this may be one of the best big drop actions in the game. The last two cards don't line up perfectly, but there were no other candidates. Grave Situation prevents your minions from being destroyed by giving them back to you, which also has value for recycling. But Grave Situation has the potential to not do anything the entire game, if playing against a faction that has no destruction. So I give the point to Dinner Date just because it's more of a guarantee, even for just the power counter. So comparing the totals of the side-by-side comparison, Mad Scientists have 10 better cards compared to 2 better vampire cards, and it's not even close on some of the cards. When most of your individual cards are objectively weaker than a faction that came out at the same time, then it's really hard to defend that faction. That doesn't mean that vampires are the weakest faction, just weaker than Mad Scientists. But when a faction can be proven to be objectively weak, it is likely to be empirically weak, which is why I rate them so lowly before they got a Titan. This is a new approach, and it's not perfect, so I welcome your feedback in the comments. Would you arrange the cards any differently? And would you change the result on any comparison? Let me know. I'm curious to see if there are 2 other factions that line up as well. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.